Hello, welcome to Hooting Mandrills. I'm Sam.
I'm Jeremy.
And we are rounding the corner towards the final stretch of our Aetherdrift Set review. Only 2 colors to go. Let's talk about red cards. Starting with the Boommobile. This is an artifact vehicle, a 5/5 for 2 and 2 red. When it enters, add 4 mana of any one color, spend this mana only to activate abilities, and exhaust for X 2 and a red, deal X damage to any target. And then put a 1/1 counter on this vehicle. So this is sort of like a fireball. It's sort of a weird fireball, though. I am not sure what to make of it. Maybe if you just have a lot of mana from abilities, maybe you're doing weird things with, maybe you're doing like Omen Hawk or Enigma Jewel Pit Automaton things, or maybe you're just producing a zillion mana with Radiant Lotus and need a way to translate that into actually killing someone. Maybe this card's good. I tried to find an Eldrazi Displacer style ability that would work with this card and could not find one. If there is an ability that just blinks this for 3 mana, you produce infinite mana, fireball, win the game. That doesn't work for Eldrazi Displacer because A, you would need to be able to continually crew this thing to turn it into a creature to make an ability like that work. That's also a problem with blue-green Signpost uncommon from Bloomburrow, Lily Splash Mentor. But also this thing does not produce colorless mana, so does not produce mana that can directly go into displacing. So kind of a weird card. What do you make of it, Jeremy?
Yeah, I don't know. This card is very strange. I don't know that it's going to be super possible to flicker and blast. I don't know how much flickering of artifacts there is. Maybe in Modern or something there's some cards I'm not thinking of or something, but this seems really tough to infinite loop to win the game. I was kind of thinking maybe in like that red-green guy who taps for activated abilities maybe could go along this.
Red
That's
Shift.
not infinite, of course, so I don't know. I think this card's a little weird.
The difference between 20 and infinity is not that much, though, for what this was trying to do. So, I don't know. It's a weird card. It seems like mostly a combo card and not a fair card, but we may see it do something. Next is Burnout Bashtronaut. This is our red 1-drop speed creature. 1/1 menace, start your engines. At max speed, it has double strike, and even at not max speed, it has 2 generic fire breathing.
This card is awesome. I think that if there is some kind of start your engines deck, it's probably goblins. I don't know. I like this card a lot. I think that having menace on your 1/1 is pretty decent. Obviously, he gets bigger. You're probably playing Horde Master alongside this guy to make him even bigger. Really cool card. Don't know what else there is to say about him, though. I might play goblins. I might be back. Kindred might be possible, folks. So up next, we have Chandra, Spark Hunter, 3 in a red. Legendary Planeswalker Chandra, 4 loyalty. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1 target vehicle you control until end of turn. It becomes an artifact creature and gains haste. For +2, you may sacrifice an artifact or discard a card. If you do, draw a card. For 0, create a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact token with crew 1. And for the ultimate, -7, you get an emblem with whenever an artifact you control enters, this emblem deals 3 damage to any target.
Yeah, so obviously like Koladin or like Astor, this is sort of a card that you can look at and think, you know, maybe if you have something that's hard to crew, this kind of does the job. Something like Weatherlight completed in Standard. I think this card's best home might actually be in, it might just be a bad Standard card, but maybe a little more playable in Pioneer because there are more good vehicles that are hard to crew. I'm thinking of Colossal Plow in specific because you have that sitting around, you play Chandra, you fire up the plow, you plow your opponent, you gain 3 white mana and 3 life, which you can use that mana to actually protect Chandra, which is a big problem with this card because the vehicles don't do that very well. Especially if you're trying to
blocking.
Especially if you're trying to give them haste and swing them at your opponent as a thing to do with your 4-mana Planeswalker. That is bad aggro at mid-range prices. Kind of a rough place to be.
Yeah, we'll see if somebody can figure out something funny to do with this card, but just looking at it, it doesn't look amazing. All right, up next, we have Count on Luck, 3 red, enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So yeah, Phyrexian Arena for red. Also a lot of red devotion, but 3 mana, I mean, especially 3 difficult mana, you have to sort of be playing in mono red to achieve this card, and then it doesn't do anything until your next turn, so it's a little bit rough to be playing cards like this.
Phyrexian Arena, or I guess Outpost Siege, have sort of been passed by time, but yeah, this card exists.
It doesn't hurt you, I guess, every turn. But still, yeah, just like playing a card for that does nothing is hard.
Paying 3 mana of 1 color to get an enchantment that does not itself affect the board, if we're not talking about Necropotence or something close to it, is kind of a tough sell. This card is not Necropotence, is not close to it, but neither Necropotence nor Necrodominance are legal in Pioneer. If you want to live the red devotion dream, maybe this is a piece of the puzzle.
All right, up next we have Clamorous Ironclad, 3 in a red, menace, crew 3, cycling red for a 6/3 vehicle artifact.
This card is mostly just junk for draft, but it does cycle for 1. It puts 4 evidence in your graveyard, which isn't enough for the good Phoenix in Historic Timeless Modern, but is enough for the bad evidence Phoenix in Standard Pioneer. Lamplight Phoenix will come back if it actually dies, which can never quite count on, but if it does, and you have one of these in your graveyard, this pays to get it back. It is a high enough mana value that it doesn't fuck with your discovering. If you're trying to do that, trying to play some sort of geological appraiser deck in Standard, this might be a piece of the puzzle. Just a cheap cantrip that is compliant with your Cascade strategy. If you're some sort of graveyard deck, maybe. It's not a very good card, but it might see some play.
Yeah, crew 3 is really rough as well. Okay, up next is Daretti Rocketeer Engineer. For 4 and a red, legendary Goblin Artificer. Daretti's power is equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control, 5 toughness. Whenever Daretti enters or attacks, choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return the chosen card to the battlefield. So that's kind of neat. Just discard your Portal to Phyrexia and play Daretti and get it back. Seems good.
Yeah, trash for treasure on ETB, trash for treasure on attacks. There are some good looting artifacts in Standard. Scrapwork Mutt is a pretty good piece that we've seen back to old formats. Pioneer, Pauper, I think even a little bit in Modern, and maybe some older formats as a artifact to enable graveyard synergies for Artifact X. I also have a card that I think might see a little bit of resurgence with this set in a few different ways in Saheeli's Lattice, which is just Tormenting Voice on an artifact. Also has a craft which is not relevant for this card, but might be relevant for others that we'll talk about later. And there, in addition to Portal to Phyrexia as the big money card to get back, there are also some high mana value artifacts that are cheaper to put into play. We talked about Demonic Junker, card's really good. Skullspore Nexus, card has not been as good, but it also cares about your creatures having high power, so it sort of works on both sides of the ball with Daretti, and it's a card I like, so I'm hoping that...
It also makes dinosaurs, so that's useful with the Lattice. All right, now we have a couple of goblins. We have Greasewrench Goblin for 1 red, Goblin Artificer 2/1, exhaust 2 in a red, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. And then we have Draconautics Engineer for 1 in a red, creature goblin artificer 2/2 exhaust 1 red. Other creatures you control gain haste until the end of turn. Put a 1/1 counter on this creature. A little goblin bushwhacker action, and then exhaust 3 in a red. Create a 4/4 red dinosaur dragon creature token with flying. So these cards are really sick. I guess the Greasewrench Goblin is kind of more of like, I guess I have to play I mean, a Savannah Alliance isn't the worst place to be, but...
Yeah, if you just need 1-drops, if you have exhaust synergies, I think this is one of the 1-drops you reach for.
Yeah, especially like if you're trying to do the Vengevine at home Afterburner Expert thing, these cards are really good in conjunction with that card.
Yeah, if you're going for a little bit less of a speed goblins and more of a cauldron goblins, or trying to mix the two, because cauldron Cranko, cauldron various exhaust abilities, I think both these cards are quite good. Draconautics Engineer is also pretty sick with Afterburner Expert, a card we will talk about when we get to green. That is maybe my favorite card in the set.
Yeah, I really like that one.
Yeah. Who would have guessed that the two people who spent basically the entire time between when Pioneer Masters came out and now complaining about not getting to play Death Mist Raptor would like the card Afterburner Expert? Who could have seen that coming?
But we'll get to that when we do green. Up next, we have Fuel the Flames, 2 and a red. Fuel the Flames says 2 to each creature, cycling 2 at instant. So this one isn't joining the Pauper fray, but we already
it's
have...
just like worse than Breath Weapon anyway.
Breath Weapon,
I think. Well, cycling's not nothing on a card like this. And
it's true, because you can main deck this. I think this would be a pretty reasonable add to Pauper, to be honest, but maybe in a commander product. Like, the doesn't deal damage to dragons, doesn't deal damage to whatever the other one is. Doesn't really matter, except, pirates. But you don't want to play the pirates one because so many red decks play pirates in Pauper. But this card isn't legal in Pauper, so we don't need to talk about how it would be in... It does nothing standard, right? I mean,
would you pay the premium for instant speed and a cycling buyout over Pyroclasm?
I guess maybe a main deck thing is the same thing in standard. Maybe, like, if your deck is really weak to the Boros Convoke deck, then maybe this is a decent card to have in your deck.
I mean, we've seen cards like Vampire's Vengeance see play, and honestly this card compares more directly to Vampire's Vengeance than it does a card like Caught in the Crossfire, which, because the blood token is sort of like the cycling buyout, the outlaw non-outlaw stuff just has so much splash damage either way. It's just not going to kill stuff that you need it to, or it's just never going to be a one-sided this the way that Vampire's Vengeance was a lot of the time, and maybe this makes the cut some of the time.
Yeah, I think it's pretty specific needs type thing. I think in the sideboard, you're happy to just put in Pyroclasm and pay less. All right, up next, we have Full Throttle, 4, 2 red sorcery. After this main phase, there are 2 additional combat phases. At the beginning of each combat this turn, untap all creatures that attack this turn. I mean, it's cool in concept, but, paying 6 in a red deck, where are we? How is that happening?
If I have good attacks on turn 6 in a red deck, I probably only need 1 combat phase to finish the game. I struggle to see a constructed deck that will play this card. It seems like it'll be a huge commander staple. Cool. Art's weird. Maybe it's not that weird. Whom amongst us would not feel like loot in this situation?
All right, up next we have Gastal Thrillroller, 2 in a red vehicle, 4/2, trample haste. When this vehicle enters, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. Crew 2, 2 and a red. Discard a card. Return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield with finality counter on it. Activate only as a sorcery.
I mean, I am not as familiar with the red aggro decks in standard as you are. If you can get them to block this thing, it's okay. It just comes back and 4-balls them again. It's pretty cute with some of the fling stuff. It is 3 mana. I could definitely see it just not being good enough in these sort of red flingy decks.
I don't think that this card belongs in just a normal mouse type red deck of any kind, but maybe in a Colodon deck this is pretty good because you can at least make it swing right away.
So it does do that anyway. It does.
Oh, it does it on its own. It doesn't
auto
need
crew itself without Colodon.
That's true. You don't need Colodon,
but cracks in for 2 or for 4. Cracking in for 4 for 3 mana is a lot better than cracking in for 2.
You don't need the Colodon to turn it on in that regard, but I would rather play. If I'm going to play a creature at 3 mana, I would rather just play the one from Duskmourn that turns off life gain, Screaming Nemesis.
Yeah, that's definitely fair.
The trample's cool, but I mean, I'm already running 6 cards in my deck that give trample to a creature.
This card, like Nemesis, is a card you're happier if they block, almost.
Yeah, they probably don't. So that's kind of neat. But at 3 mana, it's like, okay, you didn't block my Thrillroller. I don't have the mana to Callous Cell. So like in an aggro deck, having 4 mana is usually not great. So I don't know. Okay, up next is Hazoret Godseeker, 1 in a red, legendary god, 5/3 indestructible haste, start your engines. 1 tap, target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. Hazoret can't attack or block unless you have max speed. I think that getting max speed is really hard on an aggro card. Like you kind of want things to go longer, and like we said, indestructible means nothing. So
yeah, this sure does die to know where to run.
Like this card, I don't know. If you can swing in for 5, it's not bad, but that's not happening until turn 3 at the very earliest. And then you have to like set up your whole life to make that happen.
Yeah, I think this card is pretty much a non-starter in the sort of aggro decks that traditional Hazoret enjoyers would be looking to play this card in. It is a cheap way to play something with 5 power if you care about that. Cast this off Gwenna, she untaps immediately. It's free. That's also true of Black Overlord, Overlord of the Baelmerk, and somewhat true of Green Overlord, since it also ramps you as you do this.
If you impend them, does that work with Gwenna?
Yeah, they are creature spells, and they have power. They do not stop being creatures until they are hitting the battlefield. On the stack, they are creature spells.
With 5 power or greater. Okay, that's interesting.
I almost don't want to speculate on what Historic Green Devotion would want to do, because I would just like for that deck to be worse.
I don't think that this card's making it any better. So put this card in Green Devotion players.
Yes, please splash red for this card instead of splashing white for Elish Norn Green Devotion players. It does turn on Fanatic Aronis, though. It is also sort of a keyword Sue card for Soulflayery type effects like Urborg Scavengers. Haste is really important for Scavengers because it means you can actually trigger it twice on the turn it comes down and maybe get it over the nowhere to run hump if they don't have mana up to kill it immediately. So, I don't know. If this card has a home, it's going to be for something like that. Something that just cares about the good stuff of this card and is circumventing the bad stuff rather than actually getting to max speed to turn this on.
Yeah, so probably don't play this. Okay, up next, we have Howlsquad Heavy, Goblin Rabblemaster type card, 2 in a red.
Also Goblin Chieftain type card.
Also Goblin Chieftain type card. Other goblins you control have haste. That's pretty gas. Start your engines as well. 2/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. That token attacks this combat if able. Max speed, tap, add red for each goblin you control. So this card's awesome. Goblins is where max speed it has its best shot at being playable. You play this guy, you attack, you turn on your raid ability from that goblin from Foundations, and you just keep on making goblins. So this card definitely is a good one.
Hasty Krenko, also nice.
Yeah, being able to give Krenko haste is incredible so that you can just keep making more goblins. All right, up next we have Kickoff Celebrations for 1 in a red enchantment. Start your engines. When this enchantment enters, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards. Max speed, sacrifice this enchantment. Creatures and vehicles you control gain haste until the end of turn.
This is Bitter Union, but mostly worse. The decks that play Bitter Reunion now don't really chip in or get max speed. We're talking about like Hellraiser combo decks. Spending 1 mana is going to be a lot easier way to get things haste than turning on max speed, even if you then don't have to spend any mana. If you want Tormenting Voice on an enchantment and haste to close out the game, Bitter Reunion's a better way to go.
100%. Okay, up next we have Lightning Strike. You probably know what Lightning Strike does. It's a 1 and a red, does 3, deadly target.
Would have rotated at the end of the year with Dominaria, now it won't.
Yeah, they shouldn't let this card. I think it was foolish for them to let Spell Pierce rotate, so I'm glad to see that we're not just... Lightning Strike barely sees any play anyway, but the Burn players just got pieces, don't take any away from them. Okay, up next we have Magmakin Artillerist. 2 and a red, Elemental Pirate, 1/4. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, this creature deals that much damage to each opponent, cycling 1 and a red. When you cycle this card, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is kind of cool. It's a little expensive, unfortunately. You'd really like this card to be coming in on turn 2 and not based on a Llanowar Elves. But cool ability if you can just, Tunnel Girder takes 6 damage or whatever. It's pretty fun. But yeah, I don't know. Doesn't do very much.
Yeah, the Cycle Storm and Pauper is a deck I've never been able to get my brain around. It wins things and I copy the lists and try to play them and they just do not seem to do the thing. Those decks currently play Drannith Stinger. Drannith Stinger costs 2 mana and cycles for 1. And that probably means you don't play this over it in Pauper.
Maybe you need 6 copies to get there.
It does work with things that Drannith Stinger doesn't, like Highway Robbery or Grab the Prize. Can plot Highway Robbery, play this thing, and start robbing. That's sort of neat. If you just want more copies of the Monument to Endurance type effect, this one's more fragile than that. In Standard, in your discard deck, maybe this could also be a reasonable way to ping down your opponent by spinning your wheels a lot.
Probably a good friend to Sneaky Snacker in Pauper. But yeah, I don't know. I think this sort of stuff is rough. If you're really interested in trying it, it's there.
All right, here is a card that is quite good across many formats. Marauding Mako, 1 red, 1/1 Shark Pirate. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, put that many 1/1 counters on this creature, and it cycles for 2.
Yeah, this card's incredible. We've talked about it already multiple times across our recaps because of how excited we are about it.
I made the qualifier this month playing Hollow 1 in Historic with Flameblade Adept, and this card is significantly better with than Flameblade Adept. I might end up playing both if I do play Hollow 1. Just play 4 Mako, 2 Adept, try and get my curve down a little bit, be a little more aggro. But I remember very distinctly a game against Mardu Energy where I turn 1 play Flameblade Adept, on the play I think, turn 1 Flameblade Adept, they play one of their red creatures that's good at dying. Turn 2, I play FOMO, discarding a Phoenix or something. Flameblade Adept does his thing, he chips in, but it's not permanent, doesn't get a counter. They turn 2, play Amped Raptor into... I think they boarded badly against me because they spun into a Containment Priest, and that doesn't actually do anything against Madness because Madness cards are cast. But they sure did have a lot of bodies on the board, and so when it got to my turn 3, I decided that my line was Cycle Oliphant Pyroclasm in this game 3. That did end up killing my Flameblade Adept and giving them a trigger off of their Unlucky Witness or the Goblin, whichever one it was. And so it was effectively just 2 for 2. That Flameblade Adept is a Marauding Mako. I have a 3/3 and a 2/3. None of my stuff's dying. That game is comically easy, as opposed to a game that I did win but was close. This card's very, very good.
But the moral of the story is Marauding Mako is insane and is going to be good in every format.
Faithless Looting, unbanned in Modern, folks.
I mean, you can't even Bowmasters it down around your Faithless Looting. So I guess if you play it, yeah, you could.
If you play this into Faithless Looting and they respond with a Bowmaster, this thing will die. But
still,
you know, Hollow One is itself a Bowmaster deck in
modern,
because you get to play Goblin lore, and the other one's better, but I don't remember what it's called. These like random draw and discards. So you're also a Bowmaster deck, which makes you a little bit better
to play
at dealing with other Bowmasters.
Indeed, yeah. Okay, up next we have Outpace Oblivion for 2 and a red. Enchantment, start your engines. When this enchantment enters, it deals 5 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. 2, sacrifice this enchantment. It deals 2 damage to each player who doesn't have max speed. It's kind of rough, honestly. I mean, sorcery speed, deal 5 damage. You don't need the double red like you do in Scorching Shot or Nahiri's Warcrafting, but...
So I think if you're a deck that's playing Scorching Shot, you might be interested in this. It's honestly harder to cast in mono red because it costs more, but it does do the thing, and it gives you a little bit of extra reach. A sort of Ramanap Ruins type of...
Yeah, the extra effect. 2 damage can be pretty crucial in a burn deck. So yeah, I could see it. It's definitely not unplayable, but yeah, it's a little rough at 3 mana. All right, up next we have Push the Limit, which is 5 and 2 red, unplayable in any format. Return all mounts and vehicle cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. Vehicles you control become artifact creatures until the end of the turn. Creatures you control gain haste until the end of the turn. So it doesn't even saddle them. 7 mana and you can't even saddle and crew my vehicles for me? Like,
it does crew your vehicles.
Oh, maybe I just read the card and ignored that tech.
It does not saddle your mounts, so I don't know why I think I put Calamity on here probably to make that point that
it makes them creatures.
Really
it doesn't even... They're not technically crewed. They're creatures.
They're creatures,
yeah.
and they have
whatever
haste.
abilities they have probably work, yeah.
Yeah, if you put enough vehicles into play, this ends the game. It does cost 7 mana, so it's an expensive way to do that. There are a lot of vehicles that cycle. Like,
no way to cost
probably
reduce this
more
card, though. I mean, there are, but not good ways.
Yeah, not great ones. Yeah, it's mostly a sort of cutesy limited build around for all the cycling vehicles as sort of a different way to build the Boros deck in limited. But in constructed, it's probably just a little too expensive. But you can construct a deck in such a way that this is 7 mana, win the game. But there are other 7 mana cards that win the game without doing as much hoop jumping.
Or having to actually spend the 7 mana to do so. All right, this card's sick. Road Rage, instant, 1 red. Road Rage deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, where X is 2 plus the number of mounts and vehicles you control. So it just starts at shock for creatures and planeswalkers, and sky's the limit. You know, how much this thing could do. It's like, I don't know. Any card that gets bigger.
Unholy Heat.
I was thinking about Skred. And couldn't come to that. But I have now come to it, and it's like Skred.
Skred, but for vehicles instead of snow. Natural enemies, as anyone who lives in Michigan like we do would know. But yeah, this card's good. Mentioned it as a thing that if you're trying to play a little bit more of a controlling shadow deck, maybe in Pioneer sitting behind Last Ride and Bank Buster, this is a good 1 mana removal spell. Any sort of mountain vehicle deck that is looking for efficient removal, trying to play Colodon in Standard, this fits in there too. Card's good.
Up next we have Skycrash, 1 and a red, destroy target artifact, cycling instant. So a braid, but instead of the capability of dealing 3, you can cycle.
Yeah, I think I will probably put this card in Hollow One and Historic in my sideboard over Cast Into the Fire. I'm not really sweating the ring currently. Sometimes, especially when I'm shipping my hand to Angie's Ravager anyway and can't hold on to my artifact hate, if I'm not interested in a shatter effect, I might just cycle it that turn. I might just cycle it away, get extra Mako synergies or whatever.
Seems good to me. I think that this is a good card. It's definitely, you know, situational. put a Braid in sideboards in case they need extra damage as well as the artifact hate. You see people side in a Braid against creature decks and stuff at times, but if you're the problem, you're the aggro deck, who cares, right? Like, I don't care about your creature. I'm doing my own thing. So it's definitely, you know, maybe you pick one, maybe you pick the other, depends what you're doing. Okay, next we have Tyrox Saurid Tyrant, 1 and a red, 4/1. That's cool. Legendary creature, dinosaur, warrior.
Inventing new and exciting ways to die to cut down, but this is sort of a new and exciting stat line. 4 power on a 2-drop. I mentioned Bolt Bend when we talked about Slumbering Cerberus back in Foundations. Sort of a cutesy thing to do. It doesn't work against this town, but it is the one mana protection spell that could work against Nowhere to Run. Tell the bounce player no, there's actually nowhere to run for your Fear of Isolation.
That feels good. At the cost of playing a Tyrox, probably not, but
yeah, it's a little rough for sure.
There are a lot of things.
There are 4 power synergies.
There's a lot of things that turn on at 4 power, yeah.
It's also sort of interesting in conjunction with some dinosaur synergies. If you're a little bit lower curve, like, okay, playing some 2-drops in your 8 Elves deck, which is one of the big selling points of dinosaurs. But we talked about Saheeli's Lattice. It crafts with dinosaurs. The backside, which you don't see here, is star 4. Its power is equal to the power of the dinosaurs that crafted with this. So if you play this and like trade it off even semi-favorably, and eventually you just use it as fuel for your Lattice, that's some sort of little bit graveyardy, but you also have that cycling dinosaur that we'll get to when we talk about green. Put a lot of power semi-profitably into your graveyard to just make a giant menacer and maybe close out the game. 1 toughness is also sort of cute with Pantlaza, which is one of the face commanders from Lost Caverns of Ixalan that is on Arena. Whenever a dinosaur you control enters, you discover X, where X is its toughness. So Tyrox's small sad butt will mean that he always cascades into Crashing Footfalls, as long as you don't have actual 1-drops in your deck. That's sort of funny.
Yeah, so cool card, not the best, I guess, in draft. Is a little bit more pressured that you have to block the typical 3/1 card. At 4/1, a little bit more pressure, but that's really all there is to say.
4 over 3 times as much pressure.
Like I said in one of our earlier recaps, it's good to have somebody who understands math in this podcast.
4 out of 3 people have trouble with fractions.
Anyway, that's all of our cards in red. Make sure to stay tuned to see our green recap.